All right. With that being said, so maybe we'll have Tony get started and make your case around this.
Is there a case to be made, though? I mean, is there a case to be made? This is what I'm asking myself. When I was looking at all the tweets and all the rest of it, I think looking back at the very large projects that I've been involved with over the years, I think the truth of the matter is that the most successful people in leading those projects have been people who have mastered the ecosystem that they've been working in. So, if they were doing an Exchange project, they mastered everything from Windows to Active Directory to hardware to Exchange to third-party products, backup, and so forth. The same with SharePoint, same with Skype, and it's the same with Office 365. It's just a different ecosystem, different moving parts, and different combinations. But it's the same type of skill set when you peel it all away. It's a certain amount of curiosity, willingness to learn, ability to assess technology and come to their own conclusions. Certainly, it's a willingness. Hold on. It's the ability to peel away the Kool-Aid about the worth of technology to assess Microsoft's competitor in ISV technology. Communication skills up and down to the techies and to the executives. Some project management skills. So really, it's just the right type of person to me is a competent all-rounder rather than a brilliant technologist who specializes in any particular space.
So playing devil's advocate, let's say I'm a customer, right? Okay, Tony, sounds good. I love it. But in my existing talent pool, what job role is that? Like, if I were to bucket that with my existing team, typical IT organizations, what would that person be called?
They're most often in the architect job classifications, I think. I think that they're the folks who have actually got some training in that space, who've got the ability to put bits and pieces together to form a competent whole. They're the right type of people. And so if you boil that down to Office 365, it's people who have got some experience across the entire suite. They probably, if you were looking at it in educational terms, they're probably people who have a major in one particular basic technology of the two base technologies, but they have a whole pile of minors in the others.
Got it. Martina, is it the same thing you're seeing with your customers? So what are you seeing and what are you advising, especially with their existing talent pool?
So currently what I see is when I go into a discussion for an enterprise customer who goes into deployment, I try to find the most skilled person who is already familiar with Office 365 services or Microsoft 365 services. And currently I'm involved in a very large project with 20,000 users, and we have 3 people who are in the main roles in driving the project. So one is the cloud architect, another one is the overhead project lead, and the third one is the technical lead. And it could be that way as well.
Got it. And then beyond that, right? So Jeff, I assume for your organization, you're already in operational mode. You've deployed Office 365.
Well, sure, but I'm a consultant. I do consulting work, so I'm working with enterprise customers, universities, and such. State and local government. And in our role, it's usually the CTO that is kind of driving that, but you really need somebody who not only understands Office 365 and shameless plug for Tony's book. That's the Bible, right, for Office 365.
100%.
So if they read it and they understand it and they know everything about Office 365. It's also having the historical knowledge and that tribal knowledge of their company and how it integrates with their company and how they can, I'm so often falling into see customers falling into the trap of trying to do the same thing they'd always done using Office 365. And this is and most of my engagements is during migrations. So they're entering that workspace and they're learning the new ecosystem and how it can be adopted for things that they already do. And typically it's somebody who's been around for a while, who has that information and a good understanding of the way the business works, and be able to get past this is the way we've always done it and look for new ways of implementing technologies. So from an internal role perspective, that's somebody who generally, has some years with the company, but is also up on Office 365. So it's it like Tony said, it's really different for every organization. I don't think there's a good answer.
So I see Dwayne on the call. Welcome, Dwayne. So Dwayne, in your organization, Office 365 is up and running, I assume, right?
Yes.
So who are the leads? Is there one lead, multiple leads, and who's calling all the technical shots, if you may?
Yeah, so there's multiple leads for each of the service areas. I'm part of the one for SharePoint, but there's broken out for security, Exchange, basically all the different areas. So it's almost like the perfect use case scenario there. And it's being driven by a steering committee at the IT executive level, ultimately the CTO, CIO, fundamentally at the very top. And so that has its pros and cons. It's nice because you have everyone that has their accountability and responsibility to be those subject matter experts of those service areas. But coming from another company that was much smaller, where it was the resource pool was not quite as deep. Mm-hmm. It was pretty much myself as the SharePoint guy, and then the Exchange admin. And so that's where we kind of work together. And I see that in a lot of companies that don't have that depth. It's really those two, because they have the most experience, and I think they tend to understand more of the implications of how those things tie together.
How big is your organization now, Dwayne?
Right now, I think it's about 4,000 to 6,000 office workers, but it's much larger globally beyond that.
Got it. So you do have first-line workers, frontline people, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then when you say, it's great you have a steering committee and a team that makes decisions, but if there's architectural platform-wide decision-making, does it still go through that decision-making process with the steering committee?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Got it. Awesome. I see Jeff, the other Jeff, on the call as well. So Jeff B, how are you? Is Jeff here? He's ours. All right, so maybe he's unmuting. Fred, welcome back. Fred, maybe you want to share your house scenario. I think we talked the other day, and you had a great analogy on building a house. Maybe you want to share it with the team as well as how you think about it.
Yeah. So, my analogy was more on somebody building a house, and once that house is built, it's a project lead that will be designing and guiding how the interior will be built within an Office 365 platform. So that's more where somebody who has that SharePoint background, because he has all familiarity with the previous SharePoint concepts, carries over a lot into Office 365, whether it's forms, workflows, external data, list thresholds, security permissions. Those naturally carry over into an Office 365 suite. And so he has that strength, but of course, not to take away that, as I mentioned on the tweets, that it's somebody has that willingness to learn all those things.
And Fred, you're a manufacturing organization, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Good. So one thing I want to go back to Martina with. So Martina, you said you're in this big project you're about to deploy. What's the strategy are you providing to your customer once it's deployed, like from an operational perspective? How should they think about it from a roles and skill sets?
So from the roles, what we have, the three roles we define in the project is the service owner, so Microsoft 365 service owner. Mm-hmm. Then we have a cloud solution architect in the project, and then we have an operational lead for Microsoft 365 services. And the operational lead is responsible for all the technical implementation, the deployments, and he orchestrates all the other roles. So he speaks with the Exchange guys, he speaks with the SharePoint guys, he onboards identity and access management, he goes into mobile device management, and is responsible for the operational team. And this is quite an important role. And frankly, I do not see either SharePoint or Exchange skill set, because it must be the person who is most interested in the solution and who has a good overview about how Microsoft 365 services work together and how they interact together. And this works pretty well in all of my projects, especially if you do everything through operations, you probably get some misunderstandings, you don't get any adoption or governance. I know I shouldn't mention that, but it's also important to have those people in place as well, because if you do only the technical project and the deployment, people are lost afterwards.
Sure. No, that's a good point. So Bruno, I know you're on the call. We talked about this the other day. In your organization, are you seeing that transition and shift to those types of roles? Because this is pretty new, right? Like a service owner for M365 and being able to work with the different SMEs on those workloads. How is it in your organization, or is that shift happening?
Yeah, it's funny because we were recently acquired, right? So I've seen it both ways in a very short amount of time, where the operational aspect of it was handed over to us to essentially move forward, right? And if there were any large architectural changes that either we saw as being valuable to put into the platform or through our discussions with the business units, right? Because we were client facing in terms of like colleague facing, right? Not external clients, but within the firm itself, right? And we would get a lot of that information back, like, hey, I'd love for it to do this, or I'd love for it to do that, And when it came to those larger architectural changes, that's where we would go back to, our managing director of IT, CTO level type roles to kind of be like, hey, this is a functionality that we want to go through and bring in because of X, Y, and Z. In this new organization, which is 10 times as large and things like that, it sort of kind of works that way. But I think it was Dwayne that mentioned about a steering committee and things like that, and we kind of operate in that manner as well. And it isn't the feature set is just maturing, right? Like we, everybody just got onto email not too long ago, towards the middle of last year or so. Teams rollout has been going exceptionally well. Everybody's starting to get into the OneDrive for Business bandwagon also as well. And as we go through our integration from one firm to the newer firm, a lot of our folks are believing that, hey, as we move machines and move computers and things, everything is migrating onto Office 365, So I've kind of been fortunate enough to see it in both ways and see kind of like what works in one works really well, what works in other works really well, and what also doesn't work so well in terms of trying to be agile and fast and things like that. Because that's the other thing we brought up, right? In our last call, we mentioned that like the Office 365 platform is the first kind of time that the folks who have been entrenched in the Microsoft world kind of get on to that, like, hey, we're all, kind of in the same platform, everything kind of touches each other a little bit. There isn't such a segmentation like there used to be. And like we mentioned before, right? We don't ask this of other platforms, right? We don't ask the Jira guys or the Confluence guys like, hey, are you the email guy or you the access control guy? It's the team itself that's built around to manage the platform.
Yeah. So Tony, going back, how much of this do you discuss in your book, or are there opportunities to expand further? I know your book covers everything about Office 365, but now talking about these roles, because I think providing these types of inputs and guidance is critical. And frankly, out there, well, there's not a lot.
Well, first thing, I don't want to make a claim that the book covers everything about Office 365 because it doesn't. But one of the things I think it does do is that it attempts to move the discussion away from people being a SharePoint technologist or a Skype technologist or an Exchange technologist to convincing people that they need to be a multidisciplinary Office 365 technologist. They need to have that breadth. So a thing I personally enjoy about Office 365 is finding new stuff out in some of the places that I haven't looked before. And I think this is a thing that we should encourage in people, because if there's one thing that we know about technology after the last 60 years is that it's going to change all the time. And people who don't stay up to date, who aren't willing to change, who aren't willing to learn new stuff, they're the folks that are going to be left behind. So a piece of career advice for folks is that if you are working inside Office 365, take the time to expand your horizons outside what you know already. Because there's so much new stuff in the service that you can learn, you can master, and figure out what you can use. And I'll end on just one other point, and that is that any source of material, be it a consultant or be it a book or a website or whatever, can only give you generic information about how technology works. The really important thing, I think, inside companies is how people take that information, assimilate it, put it into the context of what business the company is in, and then go and make sure that the technology works for the business. That's the true gift, and that's the type of people that are really, really valuable inside IT.
So I got to circle back to Hunter. No, awesome points, Tony. But Hunter, I got to circle back because you started all this, right? You wrote that post around recommending Exchange folks to step up. I know you talk a lot to customers. I mean, being in the role you're in, almost day in, day out, you're front and center with customers. What are some of the things you hear about from customers around this, especially in light of effectively managing, operating Office 365, and based on some of the feedback that we've gotten, are customers set up this way, at least from your interactions with them, Hunter?
Well, they kind of are, but it's usually in a de facto way. And so one of the biggest bottom lines that we're creating here from all of these conversations is that the ideal situation is to have someone that's like really passionate and can learn this stuff and has the ability to put it all together to step up. But what we're seeing and where this article came from is that most of the customers we talk to are like, it's chaos, we don't know what we're doing, and we're all trying to figure it out, and nobody even really knows what roles to assign for what tasks or anything beyond the very traditional, like Exchange obviously is email, and then the Exchange people work together with the Active Directory people, and those people work together with the SharePoint people, and everything is loosely defined. But for anything that's not a siloed task, right? I mean, they're asking us the question, how do organizations do this? Who's the person to rely on and these kinds of things? And the perspective of the article was to say, not that the Exchange admin should own all the services and that's the bottom line to it. It's calling out, like, Exchange admins, especially as people are adopting into Office 365, are really in this unique position because they really do touch a whole lot of the services in Office 365 from their traditional role. And they kind of have a starting point that's better off than a lot of the other traditional admins, right? But I think the point, and for me, this conversation is pivoting. It's turning away from, hey, IT people, this is a good course of action to take, to, hey, companies, listen, if you've got a passionate person that wants to do the work, give them more responsibility. Yeah. Let them do the work, because that's going to be a better scenario for you.
Well, this ties in nicely to what Tony's saying, right? It's like, you got to learn more. There's so much stuff. Well, it may come across as we're saying Exchange should own it. Is no, Exchange folks, since you pretty much are the first people in that platform, because email goes first, expand your horizon, learn more, and maybe change your title to Office 365 admin or M365 service owner and whatnot. But you talk about the chaos. Is it because of organization sizes as well? Like, fine, large enterprises, they can afford to get those key roles, dedicated roles and whatnot. But what about like much smaller organizations? The reality is they can't have this model where they'll have a service owner, they'll have a steering committee. In smaller organizations doesn't mean like 50 people or 100 people. Like in some organizations, 5,000 people organization, they may have 3 people running everything IT, right? What are your thoughts around that? Especially if the organizations is much smaller, how can they get their hands around a platform like Office 365? Martina?
So in smaller organizations, you need a lot of support from the users as well. So what I see here is that change comes with Microsoft 365. And what I also see in large and smaller organizations is that this change is really challenging for the people, because Microsoft 365 is an evergreen service. It changes every week, every day, and people get easily lost. And so even in smaller organizations, you need to find your experts, your champs who are passionate about some tiny space within the product. So make them the team's owners or whatever, forms owners, or specialists in anything else. Then you can do that. If you keep it just within IT, it's probably just an IT deployment project and will be operated like that. So how can we turn up services as soon as possible?
And frankly, this is where automated tools can help for a small organization. I'll stop my plug now. Jeff, being a consultant,
we can talk about the book. Maybe.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
No, please, no more book.
So Jeff, as a consultant, right? What about organizations that are smaller? Like, what advice do you provide in terms of getting grips around the platform?
So adding on to what Martina was just saying, I look at it, I coach it as more, instead of it being a challenge, it's an opportunity for the person who's really passionate about their business and passionate about Office 365 and doing things better. This is a great opportunity, especially as they're leading into an Office 365 world or Microsoft 365 world where everything is changing for them. It's a good opportunity for someone who's passionate and understands the business and how these things can help. That's one of the joys I used to get out of tech ed. When we would go there, and there's people that would go there and they were siloed by their company, but when they went to tech ed or Ignite, they're able to expand their horizons and see different things and go, wow. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people who weren't Exchange admins who came to the Exchange area who said, I've got this challenge with the company and I saw a seminar about something, and that intrigued me. It made me think about different things. And so they look at it more holistically.
Got it.
And so I evangelize that within, usually in my engagements, I'm working with the customer quite closely, and I'll pick out people that are like the ones that are drivers. And so then I'll meet with the CTO and say, hey, what about, Sally? She's really interested in this, and she would be a good person to lead your charge into Office 365 and make things better.
I mean, absolutely. We see that a lot, in fact, especially in the SharePoint community, where you would see people coming from, I would say, non-traditional tech background. Right. There's folks that start as librarians or writers or psychologists. I don't know if you guys, Rima Reyes, who heads up Teams engineering for GCC, her background, she's a psychologist. So I think this is a great enabler.
It's a different perspective. Yeah.
Yes. Now I see Sean. Sean, welcome. He just joined us. So in your world, in your organization, how do you guys get a grip in running Office 365? Who or which team owns it or manages it? If Sean hears me, maybe not. Okay. All right. So guys, no, this has been an awesome conversation. We have are you on, Sean?
Yeah. Hi. Sorry, I was muted, but I'm here now.
Okay, go for it. So, what's your 2 cents around this?
Briefly, so we're just beginning our journey into Teams. So I was the Exchange guy. I'm now the Office 365 guy. I kind of took over a bit of Skype, but I'm not SharePoint at all. I've got no background in that at all. For me, our SharePoint guy is not that interested. He's not getting the ball rolling. So it's come down to me and some of the other guys who are more focused on collaboration. We have another guy. He's put in about 40 service hubs for us. He's all about collaboration, and he's the one that's really taken it forward and been evangelizing.
And his background's not SharePoint, you said, right?
Not SharePoint. No, he looks after our MDM.
Got it.
Yeah, and he's putting in Skype room systems, Surface hubs, and he's the guy who's really pushing our collaboration forwards.
And how's it coming along so far?
Good. Yeah, we're a Skype for Business server, so we're just taking the unique functionality of Teams initially, and then we're moving forward with the voice afterwards.
But I suspect you still bring in the SharePoint folks, right? Because there's that whole collab document management aspect of it too.
Absolutely, but they're not leading it. They're coming along with us.
Got it.
We're dragging them along a little bit.
Awesome. Well, no,
to be fair, sorry, Dux. To be fair, I think one of the things we have seen in Office 365 is that SharePoint has been popularized by the success of groups and teams.
True.
I mean, you think about
True.
the number of site collections that are out there today, and you just look at the number of people that are using them. There's a huge influence over what Microsoft has done in that space to give SharePoint a more human face. Nobody loves that browser interface, not even Martina.
Martina, looks like you don't agree. What's up?
It's just I can't 100% agree, because many of my projects start with OneDrive for Business, and people love that, and it's on SharePoint as well. And I don't see there is a driver in teams and groups for sure to have SharePoint involved as well. But if you have a strong SharePoint community already in your organization, they are quite happy with SharePoint Online because they get a lot of functionality and new services in there, and they can use it from wherever they want. So I don't see that it's an additional driver, but it's not the main driver with teams and groups.
Yeah,
what
I think that's starting out.
Just look at the numbers.
Yeah, I think that's starting out for colleagues, right? They don't get the SharePoint piece too well right off the bat, right? And we've always had this problem through the years, right? I mean, we go back to seeing Ducks in 2009, 2010, always with these talks around, end user enablement and things of that nature. And the one thing for 365 that I've seen actually go real well is getting them accustomed to the synchronization options that are available, so they can look exactly like a normal file share would, even though these things now live in the cloud. And then when they start to ask, hey, I'd like to do a little bit more with this. Can it do this or can it do that? That's the entry point into the web version of it, of like, yeah, you can do all of that, but you've got to do it on the web version where you can have all of your metadata set up. You can have everything going, put it into different site collections and things like that to really enable those use cases that people say, hey, I want to have this person use it. I want to have this person just be able to see X, but not the whole thing,
But I think that's one of the challenge. Now, this is going against what I talked about earlier, at least on the tweet, is I find that sometimes is a challenge with really hardcore SharePoint folks, right? They're all SharePoint. They're worshiping SharePoint. But these days, frankly, when I talk to customers, when they talk about collab, team working together, don't even use the S word. It's teams. That's it, right? But no, we got to have a SharePoint team site. I go, dude, it's part of it. But just say teams. Don't even bring up SharePoint. And then there's just this. It's not right or wrong, but it's just this shift, I guess, on how you position. In the end, if teams can really help drive the adoption and the usage, and more importantly, help the business do better at what they do, then yeah, don't use the S word. But I think the skill set and the discipline of what the SharePoint folks had to learn through the years helps out a lot in the complexity of the platform.
Well, there's complex parts of all parts of the platform. Let's not run away from that. SharePoint was complex, or is complex on premises. It's a lot more simplified in the cloud because Microsoft takes away a whole pile of complexity. So that's good. The same is true of Exchange. The same is true of Skype or
OneDrive
meetings or whatever. OneDrive. Actually, the thing that got me thinking there as people were talking is that one of the biggest technology shifts that have made SharePoint storage or OneDrive storage much more feasible for people has been the OneDrive synchronization client. Once that started to work properly, not the old groove.exe, but the new OneDrive.exe.
Two separate sync clients, right?
Yeah, but once it started to work properly and it was reliable and you could depend on it, oh my gosh, that just changed the game completely. That was brilliant.
It's the simple things in life, I tell you. That's why Box is still around, Dropbox still around. But look, we're on the dot here. Thanks everybody for an awesome conversation, and we'll cut this up. We'll share this, but let's keep the conversation going. And I look forward to see all of you sometime soon.